A new study from the University of Pretoria's psychology department lays bare the harsh realities facing adolescent girls living in poverty. With widespread food insecurity, many are pushed into transactional relationships, trading their safety for survival. In communities where resources are scarce, the pressure on young girls becomes overwhelming, with structural deprivation forcing tragic compromises. Millions of adolescents are grappling with survival amid systematic neglect. Joining me now live is to unpack the findings is Professor Eugene Lee Davids. Professor Eugene, thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, your research offers some sobering perspective and glimpses into the lives of these young girls who are living in disadvantaged communities. Could you start by summarizing some of the critical and alarming findings from your research?
Thank you so much for that. The data tells the story of how adolescent girls who experience food insecurity often engage in transactional sex with older men. And this often is driven by access to taverns within these communities. And so access to taverns means that adolescent girls are engaging in underage drinking, but they're also able to access older men who frequent these taverns. And engaging in transactional sex often would lead to an increase in teenage pregnancies and HIV acquisitions. We've seen in South Africa that there's a big concern around teenage pregnancies. Some data from the 2024-2025 financial year suggests that we had over 117,000 adolescent girls between 10 and 19 years old who have given birth.
Prof, you mentioned these taverns that seem to be omnipresent in these types of communities. Talk to us about then how they expose young girls to underage drinking, but potentially also normalize the dangers of these kind of trade-offs that you speak of.
So very often when these young girls are in situations where there's often a lack of financial resources or food insecurity, we'd find that these young girls would access taverns as sometimes very often in their school uniforms. And this speaks to the concern around us having, for example, a National Liquor Act that prohibits the sale of alcohol to underage children or persons under the age of 18. But yet these young adolescents have access to these taverns. These taverns become a hub for underage drinking as well as transactional sex. Very often when engaging with older men, there's this unspoken rule that when alcohol is purchased, that they are likely going to engage in transactional sex. And this is often to serve the basic needs around meals or some of the basic resources that these young girls need.
So you mentioned the National Liquor Act, and there are some other legal frameworks, right, such as the Sexual Offences Act. Where do you see the problem lying with regards to their enforcement? In your view, where exactly is the breakdown occurring?
Yeah, the root cause over here, Nompumelelo, is food insecurity. In South Africa, we have 63.2 households who are experiencing food insecurity. And if we had to paint a picture, if we had a street where there are 10 homes, 6 of those homes would be experiencing food insecurity. If these 6 homes, for example, have an adolescent girl, this puts them at extreme risk. Previous research in underserved communities suggests that for every square kilometer, there's access to close to 11 taverns. Using the example of the 10 homes in a street, if we had to map that out over a square kilometer, those 6 homes that are experiencing food insecurity would likely have an adolescent girl who would have access to about 11 taverns. And so the driver of this is food insecurity. When we are able to tackle food insecurity, very often what I love to refer to as a multi-pronged community approach, then we are able to tackle this. But the driver over here is food insecurity in Nompumelelo.
It seems to me that, the task is quite mammoth in curbing food insecurity. Taverns are seemingly ubiquitous in these communities. There's high unemployment rates as well. How do we start dealing with food insecurity?
So if we think of a multi-pronged approach, I'd like to think if the listeners could just imagine a three-point plug, meaning there are 3 points we have to tackle all of these. We can't only tackle one of them. The first one is around socio-economic concerns. And so this is to have economic empowerment so that we can tackle food insecurity and consequently tackling HIV infections, teenage pregnancy, and transactional sex. The next one is around community awareness of our own norms and behaviors that often perpetuates putting these young girls or putting adolescents at risk as well. We are often the first responders in communities. We are the ones that see these happening on a daily basis as we go about our business. And the third prong would be to empower these young girls in better health decision-making skills. And so when they are in these situations, that they know how best to make decisions, that they have a sense of agency, because very often in these situations, these young girls have very little agency when engaging.
Prof, you mentioned that the solutions need to be community-based and they are multi-pronged. How does a policy designed, for instance, in Pretoria or Cape Town fail or succeed to align with realities of communities, say, in KwaZulu-Natal or the Eastern Cape?
I think we have great policies in place. We have great policies in place, but very often they aren't contextually relevant. And what that means is the large majority of our communities are experiencing very different circumstances based on when these policies were set up. And so it has to be contextual, taking into consideration the lived realities of the people, particularly adolescent girls in this example. And when these policies are contextually relevant, they're able to tackle these root causes head on as well.
Have you found that the contexts are vastly different? I mean, the hallmarks of poverty are pretty much similar?
And so this particular study took place within two communities in Gauteng, very similar to many underserved communities within the country. And when we refer to underserved communities, these are communities where it's often on the peripheries of the city. Parents or commuters or persons going to work would have to take 1 to 2 taxis to commute across the area. And so the findings that we are seeing here within this particular study is very similar to findings across the country. It speaks to just about a week or so ago, we had a teenage pregnancy in Daba that highlighted this concern around adolescent pregnancies or teenage pregnancies. And so to say that the large majority of these communities are very similar, if we even look at the unemployment rates within our country, it paints the picture of the vast majority of people who are experiencing these socioeconomic hardships.
So, Prof, if food insecurity really is the biggest problem leading these young girls to lives or transactional relationships and risky behavior in lives, how then could community-based nutrition programs be designed not just to fill a stomach, but really to actively reduce the pressure and vulnerability that drives these girls towards risky strategies?
Yeah, and you touched on these food nutrition programs needing school and community-based nutrition programs to address the concern around food insecurity. The challenge that we have often with food insecurity, or rather food programs within schools, is that they serve meals Monday to Friday, but what happens to the young girl when they leave school? And so there's this need for a community-based approach, that there's this constant provision of food to meet those basic needs and resources as well. But the need for, just above the need for food, we have so many other basic needs as young people within South Africa that also need to be tackled. But with food insecurity being the key driver, where these school and community food nutrition programs could be one of those initial steps to tackle the root cause.
There's alarming statistics, Prof, indicating that over 2,100 births recorded to girls aged between 10 and 14 just last year alone. How do the conditions described in your research then directly contribute to these high rates of early and unintended pregnancies?
That's so true, Nompulelo. I just think to last year, December, around about this time, we had a similar conversation about the high risk of teenage pregnancies. Very often it is because these young girls find themselves in situations where there's limited access to financial resources, as well as food insecurity. And so it already sets these girls up for a cycle of vulnerability. It means that in order for them to satisfy this need for a meal would often mean engaging in transactional sex. And the repercussions of this are devastating. It's leading to teenage pregnancy, it's leading to HIV acquisition. And so what we are doing here is it sets up a cycle of vulnerability for these young girls. And these are seen in many underserved communities. And that's what speaks to Nompulelo. There was some recent findings that just came out as well, that for the 2024-2025 financial year, that we saw just over 117,000 births for young girls between 10 and 19. I know you specifically mentioned around 10 to 14. But these are the concerns, and these girls are in this cycle of vulnerability.
Some really staggering statistics there. Thank you very much for your time and insights. That is Professor Eugene Lee Davids, Associate Professor in the Psychology Department at the University of Pretoria.